the title, Does Islam Need a Reformation, and whether this is a question that is present in the minds of Muslims here in the UK, I think it's not a question that Muslims feel themselves, but rather they feel that this is a question that is constantly being asked of them, and one that has been asked for a very long time, in fact. And the question has never really been, I would say, about whether Islam itself needs an ideological or a theological reformation, but rather the question is, Islam or secular liberalism? Should Islam simply just adopt a version of secular liberalism? And I think that is the question a lot of people are actually dealing with, rather than the mechanics of a reformation and what the church or the Christian experience was. And one of the most frequented footholds, I would say, in this discussion, and perhaps has been touched upon by my co-panelist, Dr. Hagi, just now, is the issue of women and the liberation of women and these emblematic issues and the apparently male-dominated scholarship. And I would just point out that I would contest that, and many people would contest that Islamic scholarship has been male-dominated. There are works, for example, by a scholar called Sheikh Akram Nadwi that documents at least 8,000 female scholars who were very active and present during the time that all of these laws and provisions were being formulated. So I think there's something to be said there. But moving on to try to stick to the topic itself, in colonial Egypt, for example, this project of trying to force a reformation, I would say, started with British colonial officials specifically citing things like the veil and the treatment of women under Islam as their justification for colonialism. The Bush administration similarly cited wanting to liberate women as their key interest in the lead up to the war. So this is, again, not something new. The thing is, the West began its colonization around the world, particularly the Muslim world. And when I say colonization in this sense, I mean trying to force this secular liberal ideology before it itself had even implemented any idea of modern women's rights, which I find is quite ironic. And in the Muslim world, they took away many of the things that Muslims were enjoying, which if you saw Muslims enjoying those rights, Muslim women enjoying those rights, you wouldn't say they were in need of a reformation.
Well, what sort of rights
are you talking about? So, for example, in Egypt, there was a very common tradition of Muslim women to train and become doctors, because it's never been considered that women should not study or not be professions or not pursue these sorts of fields. It's never been considered that they should be confined to particular spheres like the household, which is what you see now. However, when Lord Cromer entered Egypt, they basically instituted provisions saying that women need not study to become doctors, saying that our women at home make do with male doctors, so you can do the same, which is a huge setback. This is just one example. There are many others. And I just want to add one more thing to this. Okay, let's say that they've been trying to pull the Muslims to this secular liberal worldview. What is it that they are trying to liberate Muslim women to? And I just want to very quickly, if I may, just set out a few of the fruits.
I wouldn't say a few.
Okay.
One or two, maybe.
Okay, so for example, shocking domestic violence statistics, rising divorce, the reduction of marriage to little more than a piece of paper, the sexual objectification of both men and women for commercial purposes, education gaps, criminal punishment gaps, the ongoing isolation and discrimination between the genders in this country, and not just this country, but secular liberal countries generally. So I would ask, is this what is being offered? Is this what we are trying to be reformed to? I would argue that Muslims need to revive what their classical understanding of Islam was, revive the proper practice of Islam as it was practiced and which flourished for hundreds of years. And that is what needs to be done. This question of reformation or pulling the Muslim community towards a secular liberal ideology, the advertisement for it, I'm afraid, is not great.
Thank you, Zara.
Whether it believes, there's basic choice of whether it believes in a theocratic model of church, of religion and politics together, or whether it believes in freedom, whether it believes in affirming other points of view as valid. And that means a form of politics in which people who are not Muslims are not inferior. They are valued, and that's what the West does, and it calls it secularism or secular humanism, okay? The question is, should Islam go down that route? Should it say, yes, there's something good there that we acknowledge, that if we do not go down that route, it's dangerous because the opposite to that route is Daesh.
What do you feel? Do you feel that without a reformation we're all going to swing towards Daesh in this country? Is that something that you find inherent in...
In this country, no, because we're not a Muslim country.
Okay.
Theo made a point and he presented a dichotomy that if it's not secular liberalism, then it's Daesh. And this is exactly what Daesh says. And he has effectively agreed with Daesh. This is the black and white view Daesh presents to the world. If you are not with us, then you are disbelievers. You are secular liberals, or you are simply with the West. This is what we have to fight. This is what we have to oppose, this idea of this bloody dichotomy which was just presented by Theo. Daesh only came about 2 to 3 years ago. We have a civilization called the civilization of Islam. We had tolerance, we had universities, we had libraries, we had Jews, Christians and Muslims coexisting for centuries under Sharia, under the same law which Theo considers to be the brainchild of Daesh. This is a point I wanted to present, and you can comment on that.
Zara, yes.
Just a very brief point to hopefully tie up the Daesh dichotomy. Just to point out, as far as I'm aware, they were actually former secular Baathists. So again, to cite them as some kind of, opposite end of the spectrum of secularism is false. And also, generally, religion is often invoked for legitimacy by all sorts of people. It doesn't mean that they represent the religion in any way. And they shouldn't be used as an example or a reason for why a particular religion, an entire civilization, needs to reform its beliefs. The War on Terror was described as a battle against Satan fought by the Army of God in 2003 by Bush's Deputy Undersecretary of Defense. So, just because someone uses the language of religion doesn't mean that they are representing the religion or that somehow their religion is now requiring a reformation. I just wanted to make something.
And then you mentioned the right of Jews and Christians to live under Islamic rule. But of course, as you will know, it was prescribed in the Quran that Jews and Muslims pay for the privilege and that they be subject to discriminatory taxation. And as it evolved over the course of Islamic history, it was agreed that Jews and Christians should feel humiliated when they paid the tax. Now, that tax, the jizya, was removed, licensed out, together with slavery, over the course of the 19th and 20th century, not primarily because this was a movement welling up from within the ideological marrow of Islam, but under the influence of essentially French revolutionary thoughts.
And I just want to clarify something and point out that often when we don't understand something, we think we need to get rid of it. And just to explain some things about what the jizya actually was, it was actually a waiver so that non-Muslims wouldn't have to serve militarily. So it removed the obligation on them to serve military duty. It was in order to have actual protection and not actually fight in the way that the Muslims had to. Not only that, but it wasn't obligatory on women or children or on the poor. And if you were poor, you would pay no jizya at all, and you're actually entitled to funds from the state. So it was merely an exemption that was instituted for people because they were not expected to serve up their lives in order to protect the state. They were considered people who the state themselves had to protect. And by way of example, when the Muslims took over the land of Egypt from the Byzantine Romans, it actually reduced the tax that people paid by 90%. So, it's not that they were, extorted like a racket or it's like some kind of mafia or anything like that. And just to sort of end with something that the Prophet, peace be upon him, the Prophet of Islam, peace be upon him, said, whoever oppresses a non-Muslim, or dhimmi, the word was mentioned before, or imposes upon him more than he can afford and humiliates him or takes anything from him without his consent, I will challenge him on the day of judgment. This is the status that was given to minorities. In the Muslim world, it's in need of revival. It's not in need of reformation. The Muslim world is an example of what happens when you try to change Islam and mix it with secular liberal values. Pakistan, for example, if you want to see whether it's a good idea to reform it in that way, just look to the Muslim world today. The Muslim world needs to revert to its classical understanding, and Muslims who are not in the Muslim world, as individuals, as all members of society, need to consciously be aware of what they're doing and just generally reform themselves. But it's nothing to do with their religion.
Okay.